Namaste and welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity Yoga. And we're just going to continue with my little exercise, my self-indulgent exercise of pulling out a question from a jar of many questions and attempting to answer it within a 10-minute time frame. I say it's a self-indulgent exercise because I do it mostly to assimilate the learning that I've been gathering over the last 25 some years of my life as I practiced and studied yoga, all realms of yoga or all limbs of yoga, as well as other Eastern wisdom traditions, as well as poetry and science and psychology and philosophy. I love philosophy. I love poetry. I love psychology. I love it all, as well as coming from the basis of my own conditioned learning, my own religious beliefs, which I still have great respect for. I've just gathered so much knowledge that is flittering and fluttering around in my head like a bunch of Canadian geese, and I'm just hoping that it will all settle and become a part of who I am rather than just knowledge that is keeping the cup overflowing, as the Sen Cohen, if you've ever heard it, about the university professor going to Nanin's house. Nanin was a master in Zen Buddhism in Japan, and this professor was a renowned professor who studied Buddhism and all the scriptures and dogma in great detail, and he was full of the knowledge of Buddhism, but he wanted more knowledge, so he went to visit Nanin, this Japanese Zen Buddhist monk, and wanted to get more insight and knowledge from him. So when he knocked at the door of Nanin's house, Nanin invited him in, as in Japanese tradition, gone to sit down for a cup of tea. And tea, of course, is very ceremonious, is a very ceremonious ritual in Japan. So the professor sat down, somewhat reluctantly, because he really wanted the Zen master to get right to it and fill his head with more knowledge. But he reluctantly agreed to a cup of tea. So Nanin pulled up the sleeve of his long kimono and began to pour the tea into the professor's teacup as the professor impatiently watched. And the tea came up to the brim, and then it began to flow over the brim as Nanin continued to pour tea into the cup, and it went over the side of the cup and eventually over the little tea saucer onto the bamboo mat on which the teacup was resting. And at that point, this impatient professor, who was seeking so much more knowledge, shouted out to the tea pourer, "Could you stop? Look, the teacup is overflowing. There's no more room in the cup." And the Zen master very quietly and gracefully put the teapot down and turned towards the professor and said, "As is your mind. Your mind is too full, and anything I give you right now will just overflow. What you need to do first is empty your cup." So that's just a little Zen koan about knowing. And so here I am with a lot of knowing, definitely not in comparison to this professor. I'm not saying I have that much academia or that much knowledge or knowing, but my head is full of self-learned knowledge, and it's floating around, and I know my cup is overflowing. So I'm just trying to get the contents of the cup to settle a little bit so that I can teach a little bit. Not that I even profess to be a teacher in any way, just that I think that learning, the other side of the coin of learning, is teaching. They go hand in hand on the same, just opposite sides of the same coin. So it is a natural, inherent thing that is in me to teach as I learn. So here I am with this cup full of knowledge, which is probably pretty useless without the experiential knowledge, right? So rote knowledge and what we learn from scripture and dogma, like the professor learned, is not going to give us the true idea of what Zen is. It's not going to give the true idea of what spirituality is. And I use the term spirituality very loosely as an umbrella to encompass us becoming better human beings, getting beyond the personality to who we really are at a deeper level, so we function from there rather than at the egoic level. So to me, that all goes underneath the umbrella of spirituality. So as I gather knowledge through my 25-year yoga practice and studying and all the other things I've been studying, I'm gaining all this knowledge, but I need to actually experience it and release some of that knowledge so that my cup is empty enough to receive the experience of spirituality rather than the knowledge of it. So that big, long 5-minute and 39 second spiel was just to introduce what I'm doing here. And again, I have this awful tendency to go right off topic as my timer gets fed up with me and begins to hide on me. Karmic thing, regardless. Anyway, I am going to digress and pull back a little bit from my rambling. I'm just trying to hope you understand why I'm here. I'm here to release this full cup of knowledge so that I have more room for experiential knowledge, and hoping that this little knowledge, this little dripples of tea you may get from my cup might be beneficial to you to a point, taking you hopefully inward towards your own experiential knowledge or your own experience of spirituality. Regardless, I digress again. I'm going to begin by pulling a question out of the cup. I will start. I'll pull the question out first before I start this timer. I just don't want to lose it. Wow. Wow. Okay. I'm not going to sure how you would open this. Please explain the gap between assumption, expectation, and reality. Please explain the gap between assumption, expectation, and reality. I'm going to start my timer. I hope. I'm going to start my timer. This says music. I hope it's not going to be too loud. Oh, that's in the background just for the timer. It's going to be too loud, isn't it? I'm going to turn that volume down. Oh, wow. We're doing good here. This is really impromptu and really imperfect, is it not? As my videos are supposed to be. Okay. Probably some copyright infringement having that back there. Anyway, the gap between assumption, expectation, and reality. I'm going to take a deep breath. And I'm going to exhale. I've already been here for 7 minutes, so this is going to be a long one. I apologize, people. What is the gap between assumption, expectation, and reality? So we're talking about a space or a gap, or what is the difference between these things? Let's look at assumption. An assumption to me is a lot of beliefs or assumptions are based on assumptions. It's what we assume to be real. And one example of an acronym that's often used when referring to assumption in regards to fear is false evidence appearing real. So it's not valid evidence. It hasn't been scientifically proven, for example. Or as Vivekananda said, we can prove something to be true when we take it outside ourselves and look and see how it affects other people a multitude of times. So if I had an experience, say, of finding the stove hot and having to remove my finger from it instantaneously, it may be an assumption that the stove is hot, but if other individuals came and did the same thing and pulled their hands away screaming, "Oh my goodness, that's hot," and I see this collective experience being similar in some degree amongst a group of people, then I can say, okay, it's no longer just an assumption, it's an evidence. But most times we have these beliefs or these false, we go by false evidence that something is real when it's not. I may think, for example, that the person next to me who is, not really responding to me, not looking at me, I ask questions and they're not answering back, has a problem with me, and that is an assumption that they have a problem with me. And I may act in according to that, thinking, okay, well, if they're going to give me the cold shoulder, I'm going to give them the cold shoulder, and I pull back, and I might say something nasty about that person or whatever. when in reality that person may have just had lost someone they loved, and they were grieving internally and not wanting to express that grief outwardly, and it had nothing to do with me. So most of the assumptions we make are very similar to that. They're based on psyche's very sensitive nature and its fear, the false evidence appearing real, that it uses to protect itself from being hurt or exposed and made vulnerable to the samskaras that are stuffed within us. So we have this sense then that assumptions are real to us at the time they happen, and we tend to go by them. We tend to react according to them when they are just false evidence. We don't have the evidence. It becomes evidence if I look at that person and I say, look, you really seem down. Is there something I did wrong, or is it about me? And the person says, yes, it's about you. You did this and this and this. And I say, okay, even then, it doesn't mean that I'm actually the cause of their feelings. It's a matter that they're assuming that I am the cause of their feelings. So they actually have an assumption about the cause of their feelings being me. But in reality, maybe it's because they have, this triggering or this samskara release because of something I said or did. So I'm using assumption against them, they're using an assumption against me. But they are still false evidence. It becomes real only when we investigate, as Vivekananda said, investigate fully and deeply into our experiences and become willing to observe what life has given us very, openly and honestly. So the individual, or maybe to go a little deeper and beyond this assumption that I'm the cause of their suffering, and look deeper into it and realize that just triggered something that was already within them. And then I, in my assumption about them, can realize that I was triggered by their behavior because of a samskara about maybe past rejection still stuck inside me, and I was assuming the same thing was happening again, so I reacted. Once I get past that and investigate fully and completely the experience that I'm having, then I begin to see that I be able to get beyond the assumptions and I get to the reality of the situation. So that gap between assumption and reality is usually involving a lack of investigation, internal or investigation. And I think the Buddhists use the term looking deeply. I've heard that Thich Nhat Hanh use that phrase quite often, looking deeply into the self and into the mind, the store consciousness as well as the mind, to determine what seeds are there and what's arising and why is it arising, and just understanding it compassionately and at somewhat of a distance. So that distance help us understand the difference between an assumption and reality. An expectation, on the other hand, is something we believe that should happen. It's our shoulding and our masturbation, it must be this way, it has to be this way, should be this way in order for me to feel happy, or it shouldn't be this way, mustn't be that way, in order for me to feel, in order to keep me from feeling unhappy. So we need to look at those expectations. They're just things we created, the psyche has created in order to protect itself. And it's all about protecting the psyche, protecting this false self. I think I am, which is another assumption and another expectation. It is not reality. So when we get past our expectations, we first of all, when we're lost in our expectations, life is constantly going to disappoint us, because if we think life should be a certain way and life is just doing what it's been doing for billions of years, and this just happens to unfold in front of me now, or this just happens to be taken away, and this is not the experience I thought I should be having, then I'm going to feel solely disappointed. I'm going to be disturbed. And what's disturbing me is not what life is doing, it's my expectations. It's this idea of how it should be. So if I eliminate the expectation from my thinking mind, then life will just come in and do what life does. Reality, as it is in this moment, will just unfold in front of me. And I won't have any preconceived ideas about how it should or shouldn't be. It will just be as it is. So this expectation then, and this assumption that we create in the human mind, the personal mind, I want to say not necessarily the universal mind, but the personal mind, each psyche that we've created based on our samskaras, our likes and dislikes, our experiences of the past, all the events we've collected and stored within us that we believe to be this little me. And when we focus on that and what that needs in order to feel comfortable inside, we tend to develop assumptions and expectations about how things out there should be to meet this inner world that we've created inside, that we call our psyche or our personal mind or our personality. But there is always a pause between an expectation and reality. There's a little space in there between what the mind says about something and what it actually is. It is very beneficial for us to start occupying that space, to start, becoming detached somewhat from what the mind is saying, the expectations and assumptions. The mind's going to do what it's going to do. It's going to create, continue to think and create thoughts and expectations, beliefs, assumptions. But we don't have to be identified in that, all that. We can pull into this gap or the space between the assumption and the reality for what it is, so that when we're in that space, we are not consumed by reality, neither are we consumed by the expectations and assumptions we had about the way it should or shouldn't be. We are in the space, observing and experiencing all of it from this space, from this gap. So the gap, that pause, helps us to fall back into the seat of consciousness, into awareness, because what we're thinking and feeling is not who we are, right? They're just objects of consciousness. They're objects of our awareness, of what we're looking at. We're using this amazing light of consciousness and shining down on these assumptions and expectations. And when we're in the gap, we can watch the little me deal with these assumptions and expectations, when they get met, when they don't get met, when, this is proven right, this is proven wrong. We just watch and investigate from that gap, right, from that space. And then reality, as it emerges, we begin to see it much more clearly. It's much more real to us. And we start to realize that it had nothing to do about little me and all these assumptions I made about it, and what I got lost in is not important. It's just, reality is just reality. It's just life being life. And we, on the other hand, are the gap or the space between what the mind has done with expectations and assumptions and what has shown up in front of us. So we are not assumptions, not expectations. Reality is reality. And we are in the gap of awareness, watching reality unfold and watching how we are reacting with our assumptions and expectations until we eventually stop needing those assumptions and expectations and start simply allowing and accepting life to be exactly what it is. Well, that's all I have to say about that. I thank you so much for being patient with me. 17 minutes and 54 seconds. I am so sorry. Anyway, thank you, and I hope you do have a wonderful day. Namaste.